The tour bus was parked on the shoulder of a highway somewhere between Memphis and Birmingham. It was 3 in the morning. B.B. King found Etta James sitting alone at the back with her face turned toward the window. He did not pick up his guitar. He did not say her name. He sat down. And what happened next, she never forgot. The highway that runs from Memphis south toward Birmingham through the hill country of northern Alabama is not a road that offers much in the dark. In October of 1969, it offered less than it does now. Fewer lights, fewer exits, the long, unlit stretches of two-lane blacktop that defined what it meant to travel through the American South as a black performer in that decade. The driver that night was a man named James, who had been driving musicians through the South for 9 years, and who had learned to keep his eyes on the road and his attention away from whatever happened in the back. He drove. The bus moved. The highway unrolled in the headlights. B.B. King was 44 years old in 1969 and had been playing the blues for more than 20 years. He had grown up in the Mississippi Delta, had taught himself guitar on instruments that broke or were stolen or wore out, had arrived in Memphis in the late 1940s, and begun a career that was built the way careers in the blues were built. One night at a time, one room at a time, one crowd at a time, with no guarantee that the next date would come, and no net beneath the ones that did. He had named his guitar Lucille, had given it the name of a woman whose presence in a fight between 2 men had caused a fire, and whose name he gave the instrument as a reminder of what recklessness costs. Lucille had become famous. B.B. King had become famous. In 1969, he was in the process of recording The Thrill Is Gone, the song that would cross every boundary blues music had been confined to and reach an audience that had not known it needed what the blues contained. He was also, on this particular night, on a bus on a 2-lane highway in northern Alabama at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, walking toward the back of the bus because the front offered nothing and the back might offer less, but at least the position would be different. The tour that brought B.B. King and Etta James onto the same bus in October of 1969 was the kind of tour that filled the gaps between the larger dates, the club runs and theater shows that kept the income steady between the performances that got reviewed and remembered. The South in 1969 was a particular landscape for black performers, a circuit that had existed for decades, a network of venues that ranged from the magnificent to the barely functional, audiences who understood the music in ways that northern audiences sometimes did not, and a set of conditions for traveling, for eating, for sleeping that had begun to change legally but had not yet changed in practice with any consistency. The bus was the connective tissue of that world. The bus was where the hours accumulated. The hours between the performance that had just ended and the performance that had not yet begun. The hours that did not belong to the show and did not belong to rest and existed in a category that touring musicians developed their own relationship to over time. Some of them slept through it, some of them talked, some of them played cards, some of them sat in the back with their face turned toward the window and let the dark go by. Etta James was 31 years old in 1969. She had been performing since she was 16. She had recorded At Last and watched it become permanent. She had recorded Tell Mama in 1967 and returned to the charts with a force that demonstrated the voice had not diminished, had in fact deepened, had found in the years between the early hits and the late 60s a register that the early recordings had not yet accessed. The voice was there. It had always been there. It was the one reliable thing. What was less reliable in 1969 was the surrounding architecture, the scaffolding of habits and interior resources that a performer requires in order to keep showing up. Etta James was not the first musician to discover that the road erodes things, that the accumulation of nights and buses and venues and the specific exhaustion of performing emotion professionally, night after night, for rooms full of people who need something from you, that this accumulation extracts a price. The road is not neutral. It takes things. The musicians who survive it are not the ones it does not affect. They are the ones who find, over time, some way to keep going in spite of what it takes. In October of 1969, Etta James had not yet fully found that way. On this particular night, on a bus on a highway in northern Alabama, the looking had brought her to the back seat with her face against the cold glass of the window, and nothing outside worth seeing. B.B. King came through the curtain that divided the sleeping section from the back lounge at 3:17 in the morning. He was not looking for Etta James specifically. He was looking for somewhere to sit that was not the bunk he had been lying in for 2 hours without sleeping. He pushed the curtain aside and found her, sitting in the corner of the back bench seat, knees drawn up, face turned to the window, a cup of something that had gone cold on the small table beside her. She did not turn when he came through the curtain. He stood in the narrow aisle for a moment, looking at the back of her head, the window beside her, the highway moving outside in the dark. Then he sat down on the opposite bench, not beside her, but across from her, close enough to be present, far enough to leave her the decision of whether to acknowledge him. The bus moved. The highway moved through the dark outside. The engine ran. James drove. Neither of them spoke. The silence lasted a long time. Not the uncomfortable silence of two people who do not know each other well enough to fill it. The other kind. The silence of two people who know each other well enough to understand that it does not need filling. B.B. King had known Etta James for most of a decade by that point. They had shared stages and venues and bills, and the specific fraternity of black performers who worked the same circuit year after year, who encountered each other in the same green rooms and parking lots and diners and buses, who understood without explaining it what the work required and what the road extracted. He knew what a person looked like when the road had gotten to them. He had looked like that himself, in the back of buses, in the corners of green rooms, in motel rooms in towns he could not remember the names of. What he had learned, from having been in that position himself and from watching others move through it, was that the correct response to finding someone in the back of a bus at 3 in the morning with their face turned to the window was not to ask them what was wrong. It was not to offer something. It was to sit down and be another person in the room, to be present without requiring anything of the presence. He sat. He did not speak. He did not reach for Lucille, which was in its case in the front of the bus. This was not a problem that music could address. This was a problem that required the simpler and harder thing. One person staying in the dark with another person until something shifted. After a long time, long enough that the highway had changed from the hill country to something flatter, long enough that the cold in the cup on the table had been cold for the length of the silence, B.B. King said something. He did not look at Etta when he said it. He looked at the window on his side, at the dark going by outside, at the occasional light of a farmhouse or a filling station appearing and then falling behind them. He said, "The road does this to everybody. Everybody who stays on it long enough. There is no one I know who has been doing this as long as we have, who hasn't sat in the back of a bus in the middle of the night and wondered what the point of it was." A pause, long enough to let the words reach the window and come back. Then, the ones who quit were not weaker than the ones who didn't. Sometimes they were smarter. But I'll tell you what the ones who didn't quit found out eventually. The point wasn't the point. The point was the next show. Just the next show. Not the whole thing, just the one in front of you. He was quiet again. The bus moved. After a moment, he said, "I'm not trying to tell you anything you don't already know. I just thought it might be useful to hear someone say it out loud." Etta James did not move when he spoke. She stayed facing the window, her reflection in the glass more visible than the dark outside. Then, after a while, she turned, not toward him directly, somewhere between him and the floor, the specific direction of someone who is listening rather than engaging. She said, "How many times have you sat back here?" He thought about it. He said, "More times than I remember, which means more times than I'd like to admit." She said, "Does it get easier?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, it gets more familiar. That's not the same thing. But familiar is something. Familiar means you've been here before, and you made it to the next show. That's something to hold on to when you can't hold on to anything else." She turned back to the window. He did not push further. He had said what there was to say, and he understood that what had been said was enough. Or was not enough, but was all there was, which amounted to the same thing. He stayed where he was, not sleeping, not talking, just the weight of another person in the room who knew this specific dark from the inside and had chosen to sit in it rather than go back to the bunk. The bus moved south toward Birmingham. James drove. The highway unrolled. The night thinned toward its end. The light came up sometime after 5. Not quickly, the way light comes up in October in Alabama, slowly, from behind the tree line on the eastern side of the highway, gray before it was anything else, and then pale, and then, gradually, present. The window that had been showing Etta her own reflection began instead to show the road, the fields, the tree line, the sky beginning its long transition from black to the specific blue of early morning. She had not slept. Neither had B.B. King. They had not talked much more after the exchange in the dark. A few words here and there, the kind of small conversation that fills the final hours of a long night without requiring anything of either participant. Two people keeping each other company in the simplest possible way. When the light was enough to see by, Etta James uncurled from the corner of the back bench, set her cold cup in the small trash bin beside the table, and stretched. She looked at B.B. King across the narrow aisle. She said, "You should have slept." He said, "So should you." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The particular expression of someone who has not smiled in a while, finding the muscles for it again, testing the feeling, noting its location for later. The bus pulled into the outskirts of Birmingham as the light established itself fully. The next show was that evening. There were hours before soundcheck. Etta James walked to the front of the bus. She did not look back. B.B. King sat in the back for a while longer, watching Birmingham come up around the bus in the morning light. B.B. King died on May 14th, 2015, in Las Vegas, Nevada. He was 89 years old. He had played the blues for more than 7 decades, had never stopped, had taken the music from the cotton fields of the Mississippi Delta to every stage the world had to offer, had carried Lucille everywhere he went, and played her with the authority of a man who had decided early on that the music was worth giving everything to. Etta James spoke about him over the years with the warmth of someone who had been in the dark with another person and survived to describe the distance they had traveled together. She said once that B.B. King was the kind of man who understood what people needed without having to be told. That he had a quality, she called it patience, a willingness to be present without requiring anything of the presence, that was rarer than talent and harder to develop than any instrument. She did not specify the highway. She did not specify the night. Some things that happen in the back of buses at 3 in the morning belong to the people who were there. What B.B. King gave Etta James on that highway in October of 1969 was not a solution. It was not advice, not a lesson, not a thing you can write down and hand to someone else. It was the weight of another person in the dark. Someone who had sat in the same place and kept going, who chose to stay until the light came rather than go back to the bunk. Sometimes that is all there is, and sometimes that is enough. Subscribe to Etta James, The Untold Stories. Every week we find the nights behind the music, the moments no one filmed, the conversations no one recorded, the places where the real thing happened between the performances. The comment section is open. Tell us which night in Etta's story you want us to find next. If this one found you at the right time, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.